Before, the discrete native tribal entities of the southeastern U.S. were essentially cleared out and coerced to migrate to the Indian Territory, various intrigues among them stemmed from the agitations of the War of 1812 and continued until at least the Civil War. A young Cherokee native born in Tennessee in the later 1700s, first known as Kanungdachalagi, meaning the man or the lion who walks on the mountaintop, championed the southern Indian causes by adhering to the, quote, civilized language of politics, and died because of it. English settlers called him the Ridge. He married Cherokee Susanna Wickett in the 1790s and moved to Pine Log in present-day Barlow County, Georgia. Later known as just Major Ridge, he was among the Cherokee Nation native notables who signed the Treaty of New Echota in 1835, the deal with President Andrew Jackson that resulted in the famed mass tribal removal and Trail of Tears. Four years later, he was ambushed and murdered by his own tribal members, a revenge for what they believed was a betrayal of his Cherokee people. The assassination of him and two other principals of the treaty, his son John Ridge and a nephew, within hours, occurred near Honey Springs Creek, Oklahoma, in the newly designated Indian Territory. Major Ridge had moved his own family there even before the forced removal 3 years later as a gesture of good faith in the intentions of the American government to allow the Cherokees to create their own nation somewhere else. But the trail where they cried, among various routes from the internment camps in southern Tennessee, resulted in thousands of Cherokee deaths. Major Ridge's own neighbor, Chief John Ross, had vigorously opposed the removal treaty, and it was Ross's own supporters who secretly met and conspired to murder Ridge and other signatories to the notorious treaty. Ross disavowed any knowledge of the plot. After the Revolutionary War, Indian agent Ben Hawkins provided the Ridge and his wife with farm implements and a spinning wheel and loom so that the young couple could learn white ways of working. At the time, this was a ploy of the George Washington administration to civilize at least some of the more compliant members of the native populations in the eastern U.S. The Ridge purchased enslaved Africans and established a successful farm. The Ridge also joined General Andrew Jackson's forces in fighting Creek warriors and the British in Alabama during the War of 1812, gaining Jackson's admiration for his leadership against the, quote, Red Stick Upper Creeks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. He was granted the title of Major, and from then on assumed the name Major Ridge. There were many political upheavals throughout the South at this time. The old Federal Road, an early 19th century innovation trafficked with visitors and immigrants, struck a dagger into the already divided tribal regions extending from Georgia to Mississippi. Thomas Jefferson had obtained permission from the Cherokee Nation to remove brush to a width of 4 feet, remove fallen trees, and construct 5-foot log causeways over bogs and creeks. This track, extending more than 1,000 miles, was conceived as an alternative route to New Orleans rather than using the Natchez Trace. A, quote, horse path thus emerged through their territory in 1805. Creek Indians provided depots for stagecoaches about every 15 to 20 miles. A Red Stick religious movement, inflamed in part by a visit of Tecumseh, turned violent and the makeshift trail became a warpath. In 1811, the government rerouted and widened the road. A land rush, temporarily quelled during the Red Stick War, renewed itself after the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and subsequent Treaty of Fort Jackson on August 9, 1814. The Alabama fever land grab lasted about 5 years. After the war, the Ridge family established a plantation on the Oostenaula River in present-day Rome, Georgia. With friend John Ross, Ridge helped establish a Cherokee Nation government in 1827, modeled in part after the government of the new United States. He served as counselor, and Ross became principal chief. Ridge founded the Treaty Party after the U.S. Congress passed the Indian Removal Bill of 1830, and Georgia implemented a lottery to distribute Cherokee lands to new settlers and entrepreneurs. He supported removal to Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River in exchange for about $5 million compensation to the Cherokees. But only a minority of Cherokees signed the New Echota Treaty in December 1835, without complete authorization from Ross or the Cherokee government. As noted above, that treaty was then signed by President Jackson and passed by one vote in the U.S. Senate. To stave off treason allegations, apparently, the Ridge family and others voluntarily moved west. Chief Ross's failure to block the treaty's implementation, nevertheless, eventually led to the forced removal of as many as 20,000 non-mixed blood Cherokee halfway across the continent. It was in June 1839 when the Major was killed as he traveled to town from his new plantation. His son John and a nephew, Elias Boudinot, or Buckwati, were also murdered within hours. The New Echota Treaty had been signed at Elias's home. The Major's brother, Stan Watty, survived a similar attempt of assassination. A Choctaw who claimed to have witnessed Elias killed rode Samuel Worcester's horse, Comet, to warn Stan Watty. Stan escaped on that horse. An irony here is that Major Ridge himself had conceived of a Cherokee law that called for treason if an Indian sold his land. After signing the removal treaty himself, Ridge told acquaintances that he expected possible death, but also that he expected all Cherokee travelers to be escorted under the protection of the U.S. government. Jackson liked the Major, but distrusted John Ross. Cherokees were divided by those that followed Major's treaty party and followers of Chief John Ross, the National Party. Many believed that Ross was in on the assassination plot, but he later denied any connection and stated that he would have done anything necessary to prevent it. The assassins were never brought to trial. Ross's own brother, Andrew Ross, signed the treaty, but was never repudiated. Today there exists Cherokee Nation West, Cherokee Nation East, and the original Cherokee community of Oklahoma. Cherokee Chief Major Ridge is buried at Polson Ridge Watty Cemetery in Oklahoma near Southwest City, Missouri. Son John Ridge is buried next to him. Major Ridge's home in Rome, Georgia, is the Chiefin's Museum Major Ridge Home, a National Historic Landmark and a certified historic and interpretive site on the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail. I visited Ridge's former plantation land in Georgia in 2022. No one was there, and the clapboard house was locked. But the pleasant, sweet summer afternoon breeze enveloped the sacred ground that Native Americans still regard with both some respect and some uncertainty. In 1819, Ridge moved his family into a log cabin here on the Oostanola River. After roughly 10 years, the cabin had become a plantation home. Here, the Ridge family oversaw a ferry, trading post, and a working farm with crops and orchards, tended by slaves. Many Cherokee adopted white living practices and customs, and mirror legal system in cooperation with white settlers. In 1832, Georgia's own land lottery gave Major Ridge's home to a widow named Rachel Ferguson. After the Ridge family left, later occupants of this home began calling their home Chiefins in recognition of its significance to Native American history. line on the sidewalk represents the 1834 boundary between Indian Territory and Arkansas. Indian Territory was defined as this unsettled land west of the Mississippi River, not including states or previously organized territories. Indian Territory has sometimes been portrayed as lawless and some of the Indians as savages or uncivilized. This portrayal is inaccurate. Tribes had then their own customs, languages, newspaper schools, law enforcement, and governments. They brought those with them when they were forcibly removed to the territory.